I think it helped a lot.
So let me start with like kind of I guess a process question, but I used to teach with Junot Diaz, and I heard him say one time that most of the writers he knew, they'd had some experience early in life where they were, shown that language is power, and that kind of gets into your psyche. And so for you, was there some early thing where you were told that music was a power source for you?
My parents, when I was born, we lived in a trailer in a mobile home in my grandparents' yard, and the only child care was that I would stay with my grandparents, because my parents were both teenagers when I was born, and worked real hard and didn't have a whole lot of money. But my granddad would teach me from really early on how to play instruments.
How early?
I started at probably 6 with a mandolin because my hands were so small. Right. And when I got older, I figured out he tried that with my dad too, but my dad never really took to it. But every kid in the family, when you got to a certain age, he'd try to teach you a little bit of the mandolin because it's such an easy instrument for a little kid to play, But I didn't. I switched over to guitar pretty quickly after that. But the experience with him, I think I owe any of the sanctity of music to that, because that was very... Like, at that time, we were just spending time together, and it didn't occur to me that it took, most of his day to show me how to play one chord, and it didn't, until I knew what it was like to teach somebody that kind of stuff, I realized that he really, a huge part of it was bonding with me. Another part of it was keeping me from breaking things and, keeping me occupied and keeping my hands busy. But he would do this thing where he'd make me play rhythm guitar for a couple of hours on the big, dreadnought guitars that he had, and he would play a lead instrument like banjo or fiddle or mandolin or something. And if I would put up with a couple of hours of playing rhythm guitar, then he would put the guitar in his lap and play blues music with his pocket knife, and that was my reward.
And it felt like a reward.
It felt very much like a reward because I was immediately obsessed with the blues immediately.
Right.
And the other stuff was fine, and I liked it, but that was, so much so that it drove him crazy because that's all I ever wanted to hear him play.
What were some of the songs that he would play and that you would play together?
We did a lot of gospel, traditional country gospel music, but he also did, Hank Williams songs. He liked the old humorists of the Grand Ole Opry, String Bean and Jimmy Dickens and songs about, your mother-in-law or something. Or he would do I'm My Own Grandpa, which I think Grandpa Jones probably made it popular, but I don't know who wrote it. But he would do those kind of bald-headed into the broom, little Jimmy Dickens, and sleeping at the foot of the bed. And, that was his sense of humor. But there was always like, a gospel number. Blue Eyes Crying in the Rain, he liked Willie Nelson, and then in between that there was something with a bit of a message.
Right. Was there a moment when you first wrote something that kicked somebody's ass that you can remember?
Yes, I remember exactly when it happened. I wrote lyrics to, I was in the jazz band in high school, and we were playing this like Duke Ellington standard or something that was pretty simple, and I wrote a set of lyrics to it, and I showed them to my parents in the car, and I was probably 13, 14 years old, and I remember my parents were amazed. They were like, "You just wrote that? You just made that up?" And and it was my imitation of a blues lyric, which is laughable now, was laughable immediately after I wrote it down. But I made the mistake of taking it with me to baseball practice. And I remember changing out and leaving this piece of paper sitting with my things at baseball practice, and one of the other kids got a hold of it, and they gave me hell. Everybody on the baseball team laughed at me. "What is this, a poem? What are you doing?"
A poem? Are you writing a poem?
Poem? Yeah. Yeah, so I caught hell for that, but not now. I don't catch hell for it now.
No, not so much. Yeah. So are you comfortable talking about process, like how you actually do it? Is that a meaningless question, or does it? I mean.
No. I'm very comfortable talking about it. Yeah.
I should confess that I'm a lifelong shit songwriter, and I have the aspiration of writing one good one before I die. So this is kind of like a tutorial. So I'm going to try to pick your brain. But when you're and these are kind of basic questions, but when you're writing a song, are you kind of lyrics first, melody first? I'm sure it's much more like organic than that, but give us an example of how a song would come to you, and then how would you extend that little idea into the full song, if that makes sense.
It's almost exactly like I was reading a thing that you were talking about in The Guardian, I think, about your process, where you'd written a piece about, how you, follow where the character goes or follow where the story goes. And it was very, very similar. Like it struck me as my wife and I passed it back and forth and talked about it a lot and everything. She's a songwriter also. She's also a poet. And so we talk about that in the process a lot. But I don't usually start out knowing what the point of the song is going to be. It's I'll start out with a phrase or with a melody. Usually the phrase that winds up getting repeated in the chorus. Now this is the majority of the time, but it's happened so different, and the structures of each song are so different that it's not always like this. But the majority of the time, I'll start repeating a phrase in my head that comes with a melody. Right. Based on the way the words scan. My mind will find a melody that goes with the rhythm of the diction of the
now,
word.
just not to be too pedantic, but that I'm kind of curious about what comes before that. That phrase or the melody, is that kind of like a spontaneous gift that the universe gives you, or, for example, might you observe something and then convert it into a phrase? Or is there some? Where does the very, very first inspiration come from? That's a question I would hate if somebody asked.
Yeah, but I understand exactly what you mean, though. If you train yourself, and I know without question that you've done this same thing, but you train yourself to look in the corners that everybody doesn't always look in, and you train yourself to hear the conversations that most people aren't paying any attention to, and you get better at pulling little pieces of those out, And I have a song on my newest album called Cumberland Gap, and it started many years ago. The idea for this song started when we were playing a place in Whitesburg, Kentucky, and they had just gone wet after not selling alcohol forever, and there was a coal miner that was sitting on the sidewalk drinking a beer, and he's covered in dust, and he was just staring at the beer, and I could just see him thinking, how is it possible that I can buy one of these when I get off of work and I'm sitting and drinking? And it took me years to get that to a song. But sometimes it's just immediate, like Traveling Alone. There's a song on Southeastern called Traveling Alone, and it happened. It's very literal sometimes. Like I was sitting in an airport, and I was like, man, this sucks, just having to go from city to city by myself, and I'm tired of traveling alone. And then all of a sudden I went, oh, there it is. There's one.
'Cause something that strikes me about your songs is they're very natural. They're almost sort of slightly heightened conversation, and as you're hearing them in real time, you're like, yeah, yep, and suddenly there's that moment where you, the listener, is really joined to the writer by this common experience. But the other part of it, in addition to being natural and organic and not sort of styled up, they're also really incredibly poetic is understating it, but the times where I guess the way I would say is they seem to have, they show evidence of a lot of revision. Like in the same way that a good piece of fiction is, it looks spontaneous and yet it looks totally inevitable. But now we have the advantage of, spending 4 years just working and working. What does the revision process look like in songwriting? Because for example, I heard Willie Nelson say once, no, you write it all at once or it's no good, which I don't know if that's true or not.
It may be for Willie, but it's not for me, you know. And it wasn't for Leonard Cohen, from what I understand, And he spent a lot of time on each individual line, and I do too, you know, trying to figure out if there's a way that's more comfortable, from a performance aspect, because, you think about the message that you're delivering, the lyric, the narrative or the prose of it, but then also you have to deal with the puzzle of fitting it into a space rhythmically and the meter of it, and making it rhyme, which can be, for me, I love having to make it rhyme, because that's the one restriction I think that I enjoy working in the most.
Right. That's one of the things, in listening to your songs, there's always that kind of, the first line will come and it's rich, and then there's a kind of extra boost when the second one not only rhymes in a beautiful way, but it escalates. I'm thinking about in Children of Children, that thing about I was riding on my mother's hips. She was taller than the corn. That's pretty amazing. So I'm happy at that point I could just turn it off. But then the follow-up, all the years I took from her just by being born, that's sort of such a beautiful escalation. Is something like that, is the first line sitting around for a long time, or is it kind of a, I'm sure it's different all the time, but.
It is, but there's like one solid sentiment that I'm trying to get across, or one image that I'm trying to get across. And it's very much like a Chinese number puzzle or something, because you have to put this word in this place, and it's got to rhyme in a certain way either, because I don't like really, really wonky rhymes, really crazy. I think it should seem natural. It shouldn't seem like I had to really try really hard to make those words rhyme. And what I'm doing is working with one image that's created by the two lines together that rhyme, and then I will change the words that rhyme a lot of times. But if I change one, I have to change the other, know.
But the image is staying.
But the image is usually staying the same. Usually it's like, okay, what do I want to say in these two lines? And sometimes I'll start from the last word, and I'll work backwards, and I'll spend time with rhyming dictionaries, with, thesauri, with whatever I have, none of it's out of my.
Right, but it sounds like is it the case that when you get it, you know it?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Usually, and if I don't, my wife will tell me. If I think I've got it and I don't, my wife will tell me.
I was going to ask, are you showing things to her in process, or is there a grand reveal where something's done and you play
it started off as a grand reveal, but then after a while I figured out, okay, it's better just to not say it's done until she says it's done.
She's a wonderful songwriter.
Oh yes, she is, and she'd be so happy to hear you say that. But she has the printer in her office. I don't have the printer in my office. So when I finish a song, I print it out and it goes to her first, and then she'll look at it. And sometimes she just says this is perfect, and then. But more often than not, there'll be questions, and she's one of those that, she's diplomatic, and in that she doesn't use a red pen, for Christ's sake.
Orange.
Some other color that's not red, so I don't just immediately fly into a rage. But also she'll ask questions. Is this the best way to say this, or is this exactly what you mean? Or she even has, sometimes if I'm writing a song that has a whole lot of my own personal experience in it, she says, this doesn't seem like that's exactly what happened.
That's
my
the
wife
one
is
a
really
fiction writer, and the best praise is when she just says, But there are times when the wifely position allows one to know the bullshit that's likely to rise to the surface, and all she has to do is kind of lift one eyebrow, and I'm like, I know, page 6, I know.
Don't humiliate me too much.
Right.
I know exactly
don't hurt me. I'm tender.
Yeah.
Is there give me a little mini course in what a good song is? I mean like your artist's assessor. Like when you're listening to something and you're having an honest first response, and also what are some symptoms of a bad or a sort of mid-level song? Does that mean?
Yeah. Cliche is, number one on the list of bad things. Always number one. Anything that's even a situational cliche or a cliche of subject matter, is just really, really hard. And sometimes I'll challenge myself to write. Like Speed Trap Town is basically, it's a song about small town life and pickup trucks and football games and things that could go horribly wrong in a song if mishandled. So that was a bit of a challenge for me.
So you kind of saw it as potentially cliche in
the subject matter is definitely cliche in country music, but I think if you handle it right and if you pick the right details, then
because that's something I notice in writing in fiction. At Syracuse, every year we read about 700 manuscripts for admissions. And one of the things that will really put my nerves on edge is any sense of overt agenda on the writer's part, and especially if the writer has the agenda and then sticks to it, as if the agenda is a thing they were going to lord over you a little bit. And I noticed, in Speed Trap Town, it never even occurred to me that it's the same material as country, kind of bad country until you said that. It feels like, as is the case in a good piece of fiction, the writer's intention is moving around in search of the actual energy of the song, both in the meaning and the images, but also in the melody. So you come through that one, and think of the title and you go, yeah, that's about Speed Trap Town, but it's about it from such an interesting variety of angles, I guess I would say. It's
Right.
really,
Yeah, and I used to think that that was a flaw in my songwriting, that I didn't have an ultimate point sometimes. But then after I read enough and really found out what I really liked as far as details and narrative went, then I thought, no, then maybe that's a good thing, that I don't necessarily have a point to make in every one of these songs.
right, what I notice is the point is often much more complex and ambiguous than any point one could imagine at the outset.
Right, yeah, and that's the trick too. I think is the trick in a title also. It's like If We Were Vampires seems like it would be very, very different from the title. Right. Even when we went in to record it in the studio, Dave Cobb, who was producing the record, kept putting us off every time I would say I've got this song called If We Were Vampires. His idea of what that was going to be was something very, very different from what it turned out to be.
I think because if somebody said to me, a shit songwriter, that's the title, I would work it to death. There'd be 5 different varieties of that, but it actually only appears as once in the song.
Just one time, and I like that. I like a title with, a lyric that only happens one time.
Right.
I guess for that reason, because it doesn't pin you down to anything as far as, agenda, like you were saying. What I'm trying to get from myself to the audience is very often just, life is many things.
Yeah. Well, I think one thing a listener feels with your music is that you're as invested in the mystery of it as they are. You're not predetermining it and then dumping it on them.
Definitely, yeah, exactly, yeah. And I've read where you talked about that as far as writing prose and writing fiction goes too. Is you don't start out to write a song about this and wind up writing a song about this and have something beautiful in the middle. Not really.
Are there specific ways that you can chase yourself off of that? Because I know for me that it would be so much nicer if I could just decide to write a story about X and then do it. It would be, my working life would be so much less stressful. But part of the craft of fiction for me is identifying when I start phoning it in and then chasing myself off that. Are there techniques in songwriting that one can?
Yeah, sometimes you can use the musical composition of something to take you in that direction, or to prevent you from going where you would normally go on autopilot.
Also,
or write a song without a chorus. I mean, If We Were Vampires doesn't have a chorus. There's a song I wrote called Live Oak that's a little bit of an allegory, and about this sort of split in my personality and my identity, really, when I got sober, and the person who I left behind, and wondering about the validity of that person, and but there's no chorus there, and had I put a chorus in that song, I feel like it could have gotten very very much like a planned out. I want to tell people what this is.
Is that because internally the conventionality of the structure would let you go back to the shore a little bit? I mean, in other words,
totally, let you get out of the water and rest for a second, and catch your breath. And you don't need to catch your breath.
Right. So
catching your breath is a mistake. Yeah. It's like, why waste their time?
Right.
Now, if a chorus is necessary, and usually it is necessary, because there's a part of a song that no other type of writing really has, and there's that part where you want people to get energized about singing a certain lyric over and over, which is really fucking weird, if you ask me. It's very unnatural, but it's also, there's some part of your brain that likes to repeat things, and it's
I can't tell you how many hours I've spent in my kitchen going, you thought God was an architect, now you know.
Oh,
it's like a pipe bomb ready to blow. And I just find myself doing that. Why am I saying that? Oh, yeah,
it had, that chorus had to be there.
Yeah.
And, I changed it a little bit at the end, and sometimes you do change things. But like 24 Frames, that song was one that started out very, very differently in intent from what it became, because it started out about, growing yourself into a better person, and about how little time you have in which to do that, and how you have to recognize your own opportunities for maturing. Like, this is the world having a parenting moment for me right now, and I have to take advantage of it. But it became about grief, and about mourning a relationship in the way that you mourn a death, and I think that was one of the really good things about that song, because there's a way of being vague without being vague,
Yeah.
a way
Yeah.
of being very detailed and very specific and still being, vague in a way that's really beautiful,
Right.
I think.
Is there, at the end of this, I mean, is there a moment where you say, it's done? I mean, there must be, but what does that feel like? Because in fiction, you can kind of, you can go through it so many times and you're kind of painting yourself out of the room, essentially.
Yeah.
And you look back and you're like, well, I approve all those messages,
Right.
so I better just leave at this point.
Right. Now, for me, it's when I'm in the booth, like when it goes to the mastering lab, I mean, I'll go back. I want to change this line after we've already recorded a song and everybody's parts on it. And, it's very last minute for me. The song's not, and still sometimes after that, there's some lyrics I change live now, because I still can.
Right.
I mean, I can't change the one on the
It's your
record.
song. You can do what you
But
like.
yeah, I can sing it differently every night. If I think of a better way to word something, damn right I'm going to sing it that way, and maybe they'll forget about the first one.
Right. Now I finished the book and I'm in that sort of in between region. So, and I guess you sort of are too. So how does that? These last 3 albums have just kind of been incredibly popular and beloved and everything. How does your mind work when it starts to contemplate the next thing? I mean, is there like I guess I'm thinking specifically about, is there some kind of feeling like there's something yet to be done, or there's something I haven't done to my own satisfaction, or is it like, how does that work for you?
Yeah, there's definitely space. There's definitely things that I like to hear that I've not done yet. And there are types of music that I listen to that I've never even attempted to create. And a lot of that is me using the devices that I've given myself to work with the pressure rather than allow it to make me anxious, and that for the last 2 records I really had to do, because Southeastern was done and people reacted really, really well to it, and it sold better than anything I'd worked on in the past. I thought, all right, well, if that's as far as it goes, then that's great. I can make a living off this. I can play some theaters, where I'd in a bus for a while. It's going to be awesome. And then when that happened again with the record after that, I caught myself going, oh shit, what am I going to do? Because everybody's going to expect that this is just how my records are going to be for the rest of my life. But something kicked in that told me that that's how it's supposed to be. I think gratitude kicked in, which is usually what helps me out of any of those situations. And it was like, no, you have been given a lot here, and yeah, if that's all there is to it, fine, but that's not even a question worth asking. The question worth asking is, how do you take advantage of it and actually say things to people that mean something to them? Now that you have the microphone, now that you said something smart enough for them to hand you the mic, you have an opportunity rather than pressure. Yeah, because I mean, I could live with being forgotten. That's not a big deal to me. But what I couldn't live with is thinking that I had this platform and didn't use it to really, explain myself to
That
people.
reminds me a little bit when we started talking about your grandfather, and it sounded like the way that he, the tradition out of which the music came and the way he approached it was sort of like making a reverence, like music is something to be reverent about.
Yes.
And so now it sounds like you're maintaining that idea that now that you've been given success and people so love your music, that the functional response is to say it's still a space of reverence, and
Yeah.
I'm not going to degrade that or let that out of my sight.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm very, very determined to never use it for any purpose other than, the actual creative artistic purpose of making it because it needs to exist and because it makes me happy and because it makes other people feel like they're not alone.
Right. Is that, and I've heard you talk about this distinction between entertainer and artist. Can you talk a little bit about what is art supposed to do? And maybe especially at a time like ours, which is a little nutty, first of all, is it other than academic to ask yourself that question, what does art do? And if it is other than academic, what do you think?
That's a tough one. I didn't consider myself an artist for a long time because I think I was thinking of it as, art is just really, really good entertainment.
Yeah.
And it's like when you get really good at entertaining people, all of a sudden you're an artist. But that's not exactly true, I don't think. I feel like art exists because it is needed, and I think a lot of it has to do with how you aim the work that you're doing. And if you don't aim it at all, if you're just, if you're throwing chickens out the window, then I think in some ways you're making art, because if it's more important to you to say something, even if that something is convoluted and hard to understand, than it is to attract something or to sell something, then I think you might be making art.
Yeah, and I like this idea of saying something because you need to say it. And I also feel too that for me there was a big jump when I said I need to say it, but also I need to include the listener in that communication,
right?
In a non-condescending, maybe even loving way. Where although I'm saying it, I'm also saying it to kind of appeal to the higher part of that person, or to to not condescend to her at all.
Right, which is very judgmental in and of itself. I think I think it is. It's narcissistic, but what's an artist if not narcissistic? Right. And I think a lot of us spend our whole lives like trying to pay for that, trying to pay off that debt, and all the times that we thought, well, I need to be allowed to do something great, which when you say it out loud sounds absolutely ridiculous. Right. But you've done something great, and some people would say that I've done something great at some point or another. And so once that happens, then you think, well, how justified was my thinking before, and what can I do to leave only footprints, so to speak.
Right.
What can I do to kind of fill back up the extra water that I took?
Oh, that's nice. Yeah. I also tell my students sometimes that at least in fiction, there's kind of a little bit of an aversion to the entertainment or the entertainment idea. And I always feel like if a person has ambition, which I comically high levels of ambition,
Me too.
Like embarrassing to think about. But if you have it, you're either going to spend a lot of energy denying it, suppressing it, or you're going to say, all right, I accept you. Come on, let's go have some fun together. Yeah. And then you can purify that intention, as you're talking about, by being grateful and aspiring to higher things. But if you deny it, then you're just kind of like, it's like you had true love and you didn't show up.
Totally.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you probably had points in your life where you felt like, this is a moment when I have to rise to the occasion.
Yes.
And I've had a lot of those, and I have them most nights on stage. That's kind of a long series of that.
Well, what a great opportunity, because if I don't get those moments, I tend to kind of just bump along the bottom, and to be sort of held to your best self it's kind of a lovely opportunity.
It's really good for a certain part of you. Yeah. If you don't get bored by the gifts. If you work hard to keep yourself from ever getting too used to it, I think that's the huge thing for a performing artist is it's very, very easy to get used to it and think that you're owed that, and think that because you've made great art, even if it is great art, which is probably not for the creator to say, but even if you feel like you've done something that goes to that next level, you still aren't allowed that. It's not a right, It's not just because you made thing X doesn't mean you deserve all this.
Because then you're making the mistake of thinking that those gifts were self-created.
Of course, completely self-created, and that's the problem. I think that's the problem that we're dealing with more than anything else right now. Is the American dream gives people an idea that the bottom that they started from was the very bottom and the absolute bottom, and it's so important as an American to feel like you earned what you have. And that to me is very, very dangerous. Very dangerous, because I was reading something you'd said about traveling to parts of Asia, and I think Singapore, where you said you saw what it was really like for somebody to be poor and to have no other options. And now in this country we have so many people who think that legal naturalization is an option for everybody. They don't understand how you could be in a place where you cannot legally become an American, or how you could be in a place where you can't leave Houston before the hurricane hits. It just doesn't. To them, they think, well, I've been poor, so I could have done it.
That's
and
right.
But
also that American idea that says that makes that weird connection between good luck and individual virtue. You're born a certain way with certain gifts, and you forget that you sort of just came out of heaven that way. And you.
Yeah, you forget about that time you won the lottery.
That's right. That's right.
How did you forget about winning the lottery?
Well, I won it because I've heard people say, well, at least I played. Right. That was my.
Yeah.
Are there I'm thinking about this. Are there songs that well, first of all, does your faith in the power of music ever wane? for example, you wake up and the idea of music is a little stale, or it isn't speaking to you. It always speaks to you.
It does, and I don't listen to as much music as a lot of my peers. I don't, my wife listens to way more, and so that's something I have to work to do, And last week I bought like 5 or 6 records, and I work hard to stay current. My wife says it's very important to know what's happening out there.
You're pushing off against you,
yeah.
But are there songs that from your past that you turn to like, that's a good song, or
you mean ones I've written?
Yeah, or that, and also others like benchmarks that you would kind of every so often go back and look at and go, okay, this is. First of all, but for you, what are your 3 favorites of yours?
Of mine?
Yeah. As of right now, I guess.
I think Elephant is probably my best song. Probably my best song. But Vampires on the new record is that good too, I think. I think they're pretty even as far as, I can't find any fat on them.
When you write a song like that and you come back and listen to it, does it feel like you did it? Or is there a sense of like, wow, that...
Not really. Yeah, you're right. It's kind of like, I wept, with both of those. With Vampires, I couldn't sing it to my wife to show it to her. I just had to stop and wait 10 minutes and start over and stop again. And in the studio, I choked up, And yeah, that seems... To me, I was embarrassed by that whole scene because it's like, what an awful thing to be, this moved by something that you just made up. But at the same time, it was everything that went into it, and it was that feeling of, that conduit thing that songwriters talk about sometimes. And it's true. I don't want it to be true. I want it to all be because, I sat there and worked really hard, but that one didn't take very long at all. It's just you're holding on, and a song I wrote called Dress Blues years ago, which is not a very lyrically mature, the craft of the song is not where I am right now, but I wrote it in the time it took to write it down on a piece of paper, and it was another one of those that I broke down when I was done with it because it was about somebody that I knew and, something that had actually happened, and I just felt like I was hanging on and just trying to get it out before it went on to the next station.
Because, I have had the feeling that one of the reasons we get so addicted to this creative stuff is that it frees me temporarily from this guy. You're in the throes of process. Somehow you get access to something that, it must be you, but it's also not you. And for me, that's the most wonderful thing is when you find that you're better than this person, and then that thing goes out and connects with a part of the audience that also is better than they are in day-to-day life. So it makes sense to me that you could write a song and move yourself with it because you're not actually writing it. It's some other...
Right. You've accessed something that you don't live with. Right. Something that you're not in close quarters with all day, and something you're not tired of yet. Some part of you that doesn't reveal itself enough for you to be irritated by it. Quite. It's like,
that's the dream.
It's like your nephews or something. Oh, I'm so happy to see you again. I don't have to clean up after you.
Right. What are the top 3 guitar solos in your personal lexicon of other people that are like that?
Okay.
And what makes a good one? I guess that's...
Well, I think the Stairway to Heaven outro is pretty hard to beat.
Yeah.
I think Hendrix All Along the Watchtower solo is something that just nobody had ever heard anything like that before. Yeah. And I really love David Lindley's lap steel playing. I like his fiddle playing too, but I think on what he did on Running on Empty, the Jackson Browne song, I think that little snippet is, as far as spontaneous musical creation, is really, really, really good. There's wit about it, and I think a solo that you're improvising, you have to you have to be really thinking on your feet, and you have to. It's almost like a chess match because you have to see steps ahead while you're playing. You have to see a way out that makes sense, that bookends, And
when you're doing that, are you thinking melodically or sort of in shapes? Is it, you know what I mean?
Melodically.
Melodically.
Yeah, melodically. Usually, I'm singing it in my head, or I'm sometimes actually singing it. I think that's a really good thing for musicians who are improvising is to sing along with what you're playing while you're improvising, because that steers you more out of the physical and into the emotional, into the melodic world rather than looking at where your hands are falling on the instrument.
Let me jump to something else. I think we both come from places that probably skewed Trump in the last election. So can you give me I mean, this is the totally bullshit question, unfair, but what is your assessment of what's going on in our country in the last, 300 years, or say 10?
Well, I don't think we've looked in the closet quite enough. I think the fact that we've avoided conversations for so long is catching up to us now that those conversations are unavoidable since we're all in such close contact because of cell phones and the internet and social media. We're being forced to talk about things that we should have talked about 50, 60, 70, 100 years ago. Yeah. That makes me happy. I'm glad to see the conversations finally happening, but it's kind of like having an intervention with somebody, that's been an addict for 15 years. It's like, I should have done this. Would have been way easier if you'd done it 10 years ago. Right. I'm just not convinced that our country elected Donald Trump president. I'm still not convinced. I've not seen definitive evidence yet that happened, without some sort of outside influence. And I think that probably a lot of people don't put their money where their mouth is, and a lot of people say one thing and vote another way. And I think a lot of people, more than I assumed, a lot of people feel like the system doesn't represent them, so they were ready for anything other than the system. Now that I could understand if it didn't include sexism and racism and, a general disregard for anybody who's not white and male. But when you throw those things in, I don't feel sorry for anybody who felt excluded and voted that way now, because they should have outgrown those things. I feel sorry for a 2-year-old who uses the N-word, but not for a 20-year-old or a 30-year-old or a 40-year-old.
Right. Yeah. It does kind of feel like there's that Lincoln book had so much Civil War stuff in it, and I finished it before the election and thought, oh, in some ways we've never concluded the Civil War, and then we really didn't.
Now we know for sure it's true. Yeah.
But I love in your song "White Man's World." There's a really beautiful idea that it's not the line. I'll probably misquote it, but no war is
no such thing as someone else's war.
Yeah, and I think that for me, I've been thinking about this stuff a lot and thinking that racism is a white person's sin in our country, and that those of us who maybe stupidly thought that was all in the past. I feel like for me now is the time to really start thinking about it and trying to expunge any trace of it and be a leader in that way, instead of just someone who says, oh yeah, I definitely think racism sucks, but to actually be an aggressive advocate of the opposite, which is such an American idea that we really believe we're all equal and we're really going to live that way.
That seems to be, I don't know if that's what the Founding Fathers had in mind, but that's what I always grew up thinking. That's what they should have had in mind. And I know some of them definitely did not have that in mind.
They had it sort of opposite.
But what American has always meant to me was that the dream is available to us all, and like none of us are free. Like that song. Who I don't know who was originally responsible for that. Maybe Curtis Mayfield, but I know he did. If there's a hell below, we're all going to go. But I think none of us are free. Might have predated that. But if one of us is chained, none of us are free. And to me, I think that inclusion, helps everything. When you realize that this is our fault. And of course, my family didn't own slaves. They were pretty broke, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. And I think people have a hard time. White people who believe that racism can work both ways don't understand the connection with power. They don't understand that you have to be in a place of power to really be racist in a systematic way. It's not just about some angry kid calling you a cracker or a white boy. It's you have to be able to exert force in some way or another on the person that you're.
An elephant sitting is heavy.
Yes. You're, a mouse sitting on an elephant is not the same as an elephant sitting on a mouse.
The elephant says, "You're sitting too."
Right, you're sitting on me also. Yes, but I'm a mouse.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So do you have a sense of what's next? I mean, you're touring now, but are there songs being written now or forming? Or?
There are songs forming, yeah. I'm always taking notes, and writing little riffs on the guitar, and then when I go into the process, when I get a deadline set for myself, thank goodness I have the label and nobody's breathing down my neck, and I have my publishing now and all that stuff. So when I get in my mind that I want to make a record and set a deadline, I'll go through all the notes and I'll really dig in. Start spending 5 or 6 hours a day or more, working. And this part I don't consider to be working. Right. The touring, the traveling's not easy, but it's a lot easier than it used to be. Because sometimes I did 200 shows in a van in a year, and that's brutal.
For you, when you go to play in a little bit here, is it a rush? I mean, it's every night is a thrill?
Definitely, yeah, definitely. There's adrenaline every time I go out, and if there's not, I think, what have I done wrong today? Did I not sleep last night, or what? Because people, the people I know who love your music, they really love it. I mean, it's not just like, oh yeah, I really like his songs, but those songs really speak to them in a deep. You must feel that. I do. I'm very grateful for that, and I feel like that's because I didn't set out to make music that was being consumed while you were doing something else. Because a lot of music is for that, and there's a place for it. I love. Bubblegum pop music sometimes, if it's done the right way. Most of my favorite pop music is ESL, what I call ESL pop. English as a second language. Because I think that really they don't, the way the English language comes across, for somebody who's not from the U.S. or the U.K., is very interesting to me in a pop song. I think it just makes for better lyrics because they're not trying to mean as much. Now that's just in pop music, but back to my point is I really try very hard to make music that is supposed to be listened to while you are listening to music. Maybe you're driving a car, maybe you're jogging, but you're not socializing with anything other than the song. And you're not, grilling out and hanging out with your friends and talking while Elephant plays in the background. It's not for that. And, people say sad, they say it's sad, and that's just drives me crazy. The two things that drive me the craziest about, people's attitudes toward the music that I make are it's sad, meaning it's moving. It's not just sad. Mornings are sad, and then they're funny, and then life is sad, and it's also all this other shit. But it's sad, and also when they assume that every first-person narrator is me. That is so frustrating.
What I find really sad is a song or a piece of art that doesn't engage with the whole range of things, or it's kind of propagandistic, or that kind of American thing where you're like, don't take it so serious. Thing. If you could look back at the songwriter you were at 20 or 21, what would you say to him? Or I guess what I really want to know is, how has your aesthetic sense changed since then? What do you value now that you didn't value then, or vice versa?
I do more editing now, that's for sure. The time I spend editing has grown over the years a lot. That's a hard one. That's a hard one for me because I feel like I'm in such a really good place now, creatively and personally, that I wouldn't want to jinx that. I would just not even. Plus, I also wouldn't want to have a conversation with that asshole. So.
he wouldn't listen anyway.
No, he wouldn't listen.
It's funny to me how much of the process that one goes through after something's done, where you talk about it. Sometimes in the middle of talking about it, I'm like, that is bullshit. That is not actually. I'm saying something that is theoretically true, but in the actual practice,
it's not. I do that. I catch myself. And in reality, it's one big thing, And if that process wasn't what it was, this process wouldn't be what it is, And I was not in a hurry to get to my peak, And I'm not now in a hurry to get better. I mean, you know what I mean? I want to get better, but I know what it takes to get better, and I know that it takes that amount of time of really refining why do I like this and why is this necessary. And I go back and I play a lot of those songs still, a couple of them a night that I wrote when I was 21 or 22. And for the most part, I think they're good, I can still sing them without cringing, and they're okay, and they rock sometimes more than, they have more energy maybe than what I have right now. But I think, try to be probably more empathetic. That's it. You know, just try to see other perspectives other than the one of the narrator or the point you're trying to drive home in these songs. You know, because I look back at a song like Outfit, which I wrote for the Drive-By Truckers, and that song meant a lot to a lot of Drive-By Truckers fans and a lot of people who have close relationships with their father. But now I look back on it now and I think there's something about that's a little bit exclusive. That's a little bit, you know. I was trying to get across my dad's personality in a humorous way, and you know, it could have even come across as being a little bit homophobic at some point. And for the longest time, it never occurred to me. Right. And then like Terry Gross asked me something about it, and I was like, oh shit, Terry Gross, Terry Gross knows what's up, and I'm in trouble. You know, you got to watch out for the Terry Grosses of the world. There's one of them, but
it's funny how when you get to the, you know, well, to the middle or at some point in your writing, you look back and you see that it's almost like books that are a little bit wonky on the shelf. Like they're not all straight, and maybe if you went back to straighten them up, they'd lose some essential energy.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
But it sounds like you have a lot of faith in the kind of I always call it the subconscious. Maybe that's the wrong term, but that kind of thing that you don't have control over, but it seems to be pretty smart, and it seems to be bent on progressing somehow. And then I feel like if I just honor that by showing up to work every day, that thing is smarter than me, and it kind of leads you a little bit. I mean, and it might cause some mistakes, but in the end, it causes growth, whether you want it or not. And all you have to do is sort of honor it by not forgetting it's there, and that you have to service it through labor or something like that.
I think so. Like the muse likes to find you working, kind of thing.
Exactly. Yeah.
But also, you know, I've gotten better at shifting between that and the frontal lobe, you know, and I think that's a big part of what the editing process is, figuring out how to get in and out of that coat, you know, put that suit on, very quickly go back and forth between the suit that you don't necessarily have control over and the suit that you do.
That's great, because and that it's totally fine to wear both suits. They're both you, and they're
completely,
useful at the time.
Yeah, and as long as you know, as long as you don't ignore either one of them, and you know, keep them in good shape, then they'll both fit forever, you know. But it is that I think sometimes when I'm writing, I think, okay, now it's time to shift into the other gear and fix this, you know, go back and fix it. I have had exactly that experience. Yeah. Your
lyrics are incredible. Are there poets that you read? Are you a reader of poetry?
Not as much as far as like current poets. I was a big fan of Mark Strand and you know, Louise Glick and a lot of the things that I read in college, I continued reading afterward. And, you know, with the 2-year-old and the touring schedule, and it's about all I can do to get to the fiction that I really enjoy a whole lot, you know. And I went through a period there. I think Jennifer Egan hit me in a way that just really made me have the closest I've ever had to a panic attack. Like, I was on a plane reading Visit from the Goon Squad, and it just hit some part of me so hard that it was almost like being on LSD or something.
I had the same thing on a plane with David Foster Wallace's Oblivion. And I don't know, really? It was hitting me in a really agitating and not altogether pleasant way.
Yeah, it was very unpleasant. It made me nauseated. And you know, I felt myself like break into a kind of a cold sweat.
Truth sucks.
The truth does suck. And I felt like I couldn't reason with what I was. I was getting judged by something that I could not make excuses to.
That's right. She's got a new one out called Manhattan Beach that I read in galleries, and it's
is it really great?
Yeah.
Pretty much everything I've read of hers, I've just really loved. Even the story that she did in like tweet size, that was so good. Yeah. But you know, I like Peter Matheson's work a lot. Dennis Johnson, I think, was.
Did you write fiction? Good. Are you tempted in that direction?
I am tempted, and I have tried, but I don't like it. You know, I just don't like it. And when I start writing a song, within a few minutes, I can find something that makes me happy, something that's the reward of you've just written a good line. But with fiction, I can't do that. And I know it's a matter of something that I should just work through. And at some point, I think I will do that and keep working and try to write a page a day for a year, and then figure it out and try to find a good editor and all that kind of stuff. But right now, I can't get to that release. You know, I can't get that like serotonin shot of you just did an awesome rhyme. Keep going.
Right.
You know?
I have a theory. This may not be right, but I feel like I've talked to a lot of people about this, and there's a moment in your young life when you make a stand for some art form, where you go, okay, I've got to be all in on this, or I'm not going to be who I want to be. And I think for me, that was prose. I used to play guitar and stuff. I never could get any decisiveness about it. Like, yeah, that's kind of good. But with prose, I always knew what I believed in, and that resulted in that serotonin shot.
Yeah.
Like, if you see something that you wrote that sucks, and if you fix it, and then you get that little thing. So maybe it seems like so much of what we do has to do with that split-second visceral reaction. I love it, I hate it, and then also that authority of knowing what to do next to make it better or something like that.
Oh yeah. Knowing where to go. Also, sometimes, and I know this happens as a musician, and I'm not sure if it happens in other types of writing too, but I feel like over time you start figuring out what mistakes could be followed and what mistakes could wind up giving you a voice that, while maybe not unique, is still something that belongs to you, Because like I go back and listen to, like for example, there's a Wurlitzer piano over there, and if we were to plug it up and play it, it would sound absolutely nothing like a piano, But the intention was to recreate an acoustic piano in a small portable unit. The sound it makes is probably just as good and really very, very useful in popular music, rock and roll music. Sometimes it's better than a piano for that, but it's not anything like what they were shooting for. And I listen to the Rolling Stones, and I think, they were just trying to be black American blues musicians, and they missed, splendidly. Then they kept missing in the same way. It's almost like they knew that's the mistake to follow.
Right, the mistake to follow. So you're saying that sometimes in the process you aim for perfection, you don't get it, but then by acknowledging it and then using that, it becomes a different kind of perfection.
Right. And I think I'm kind of trying to ask you that question, because when I read your work, I get this, I feel like I get a sense of who you are, but also I think it's kind of impossible that you could have that many interests, because sometimes I read something like the Simplica Girl Diaries that seems like science fiction in a way, but then it extends so far beyond that, and a lot of the stories in that collection were that way to me. It's like, how could you possibly have the time in the day to have that many different interests that all seem to tell me how you view the world, how you see the world? Your
instinct is right, because all those things start off to be something else, and I fuck them up.
Yeah.
And then instead of denying them, I go, okay, all right.
And you figure out what to follow.
And then in fiction, what you do is, you rework it so many times that it starts to teach you its own logic. And those early, it's like, I guess maybe like if a diamond was forming, there was a turd in it, the diamond would form around the turd.
Yeah.
And if it formed enough, you'd forget that there was a turd in it. That might not be the most graceful analogy.
Right,
But in a certain way, I think that's the confidence you were talking about, to follow the mistake, because I'll start to do something and I'm like, oh, this would be such a nice story about X. And then I drop it and it shatters and it's a big mess. And at that step, I think when I was younger, I'd say, okay, I got to start over or go to law school or something. But now I'm like, okay, you made a mistake, but a mistake is only a mistake if you don't acknowledge it and accept it and then build on with it. Yeah.
Like Dwayne Allman playing the wrong note again.
Right.
That's what he would say, it's never the note, it's the one right after it that's right or wrong.
Right.
He said, if you play the wrong note, just play it again.
Right.
And then see where that goes.
Right.
And, you're always a half a step away from the right note, so you'll find it eventually.
If you insist on it a few more times, then
it becomes the right note.
That's right. Well, I've loved talking to you. Thank you so much.
I have loved that, too. And I tell you, like with Lincoln and the Bardo, I can't even describe that book to people without getting emotional. Like trying to tell people what the fucking book is about is hard for me, because it's such a beautiful story.
To tweet about it, and it meant a lot to me.
Oh, good. Well, I loved it. I'm glad it's having success, because it's a great book.
Onward.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Yeah. Enjoyed it.
Me too.
And then right here it's got the tattoo that my wife and I got on her 30th birthday in New Zealand.
Let's
Really,
stay in touch.
really
Anything you ever
pleasure.
need.